Discrete event simulations are one of my personal favourites, and they represent one way of overcoming the challenges of Markov or semi-Markov models when the time dependency is really important. A discrete event simulation is inherently a patient-level model because of the way that it's set up and its structure, which we will get into now. So a discrete event simulation is a type of patient-level simulation model. The time to events are sampled in discrete time, which can be more realistic than moving patients through the model in set cycles as you would in a Markov model. So if I talk through the example model schematic on the right-hand side, this will help better explain how the discrete event simulation works computationally. So the model starts by sampling one patient from individual patient-level data. So you take that one patient's data points and their characteristics are stored. So this can be things like their age, other characteristics related to the disease, their gender. And then based on these characteristics for that one patient, the time to different events are estimated. This is usually based on regression equations. So these are predictive equations that take inputs such as the patient characteristics and predict an output based on those characteristics. And in this example, the model estimated the time to discontinuing treatment, the time to a change in CD4, which is a measure used in HIV, and the time to death. And then whichever of these three times is the shortest, this event is determined to be the next event that happens. Then the relevant costs and QALYs are calculated based on this and the amount of time that has passed. So whereas before in, for example, a Markov model, the costs and QALYs would always be based on the same, for example, monthly cycle, here you have to take into account the time that has passed because the time to event can be changing every time it's estimated. So then if the patient dies, they exit the model. If they discontinue, they switch to the next treatment. And this is useful to know if you want to model treatment sequences, then a discrete event simulation is a great way to be able to incorporate that flexibility. And then if a CD4 change occurs, then the times are all re-estimated and the process continues until the patient has exited the model. Then every time a new event is estimated, it will depend on the time elapsed, the patient's characteristics, which can be updated over time, so their age will increase accordingly. If an event has happened, that can potentially be recorded and the information can be used to predict what happens next. And this whole process is then repeated for every patient that goes through the model, so using their individual patient data, and then is all aggregated at the end. So just to summarize that again, so the event likelihoods can be determined by individual patient characteristics. These are recorded at baseline and they can be updated over time. The costs and QALYs are estimated and stored when an event happens, and this takes into consideration the amount of time that has passed since the last event. The results are then aggregated over time and for all the patients to produce the summary experience for the whole cohort. And discrete event simulation is therefore likely to be really useful for modelling complex conditions where there are many different types of events and health states. And one example of this could be the complications of diabetes, when there can be different events that the patient is at risk of, for example, cardiovascular events such as strokes and heart attacks, and situations also where the patient's history impacts the future events. So the strengths are that it can account for the patient heterogeneity, with it being a patient-level model. The flexibility can be applied for modelling multiple events and also for taking into account the time dependency. However, the main limitation is that it does rely heavily on data and is more complex. So whereas the other models we've discussed so far could be typically developed in Excel, a discrete event simulation would need to use a programming language, One way to do this is to use Visual Basic, or VBA, which is Excel's inbuilt programming language. And this allows for Excel to still be used as an interface for the inputs, and the VBA programming is being used in the background. The discrete event simulation does rely heavily on having access to patient level data and that being available to use in the model. And because of that, it can sometimes limit this approach. So if the patient level data isn't available, then another alternative might be needed.